All right, now we're on to pension expense, and this is where things will get a little bit tricky. But we're going to take all these pieces, the plan assets, the liabilities, the pension expense, and we're going to pull it all together at the end so it'll make more sense. Pension expense is going to be made up of a couple different things. Service costs, that should sound familiar. We talked about it with the liability. It's what people have really earned by working this year. Interest cost, that's our time value of money, right? We need to increase our liability by crediting it, increase expense for the fact that that liability needs to grow over time. Now, this is an interesting one. Expected return on plan assets, right? We've given cash to that third party to invest, hoping that those assets will grow over time. And as the asset grows, our liability grows, right? Because we've got the time element. It's growing them both. So if I'm going to have to record the interest cost, then I should be able to actually subtract how much I think my plan assets will earn, right? So these two together, in theory, in a perfect world, they would cancel each other out, but we're going to find it's not a perfect world. If we've made some changes to our plan that we're retroactively adjusting people's benefits, we've got to amortize those. FASB says you don't have to take that expense all at once. So, for example, if we changed our pension plan and said, you know what, instead of giving you guys 4% of your salary when you retire, you'll get 5%. That would be a huge adjustment to run through expense in one period. So companies have the option of amortizing it over a timeline. They can take it all at once, but most people take the option of amortizing it. And then we're going to take amortization of pension gains and losses. Now, you might be saying, wait, which gains and losses is this? Are we talking about assets? Here we're talking about the gains and losses that we said come from our actuaries, right? The people making all of these estimates. When they make these estimates, remember we put those changes, right? So the change in estimates, when we talked about it from a liability perspective, we said, hey, those change in estimates go to OCI. Right? So why are you seeing something here? Well, it gets stuck here when it gets too big. So you're going to see us go through something called the corridor approach. And that's where if we've got those changes and estimates are just getting too big sitting in OCI, we take this corridor approach and we pull some into expense. All right, so again, we've talked about each of these. Service costs is the increase. Right? Actuaries estimate it. Being an actuary is kind of like being a CPA. The two jobs are very similar. I think actuaries probably use a lot more math than we do in accounting, but you tend to see people drawn to those two fields. The interest costs results in an increase. Again, it's because that PBO is discounted, and we've got to recognize the fact that time is passing, which makes the obligation need to grow. Right? If we wanted to do the math ourselves, we would take that PBO balance at the beginning of the year times the discount rate. That would be our interest costs. The expected return, this is the one I told you goes hand in hand with the interest costs. This is what we expect the assets to do. Because remember, if I do my job perfectly, which is impossible to do here, I have assets that will grow. And I have liabilities that will grow just because of time, not talking about anything else, right? And in theory, if the assets grow at the same rate as the liabilities grow, then my expected return here, let's say it was $10, would equal my interest expense here of $10, and they would cancel each other out. But again, we're not going to see that actually happen. The way we get that number is we take the fair value times the plan assets at the beginning of the year, the fair value of the plan assets at the beginning of the year times the expected rate of return. Now notice it doesn't say actual, right? And they let us smooth pension to a certain degree because they just say, you know what, go ahead and take your current discount rate to adjust your liabilities, but you can do what you expect on the assets. And then again, we're going to have an increase to that pension expense for any prior service costs. So these are changes made on plan amendments that impact the current liability. You can usually amortize those via straight line. And then the amortization of pension gains and losses. So again, that's when the balance in OCI, and the OCI balance gets created when our actuaries change their estimates on how long people will live, how long people will work for us, what their salaries would be. When that adjustment becomes too big, we've got to pull some of it out to OCI and move it to expense. We'll use this corridor approach, right? So the balance is too large if it exceeds the corridor, which is defined as 10% of either the PBO at the beginning of the year or the fair value of plan assets at the beginning of the year. Okay, so I'm going to compare these two. I'm going to say which is larger. If I decide the PBO is larger, I'll multiply it times 10%, right? That's now the number, right? I need to compare to what's sitting in OCI and amortize any excess, right? So I compare that to OCI and amortize the difference. So we'll go through an example of that. Okay, again, just a recap of the pension expense. This is a handy piece to have. So we've got a lot of different numbers on this page, right? We got our PBO, we've got plan assets, we've got the OCI, both for prior service costs, right? Which I told you could kind of defer and amortize. That's when we change our documents. And then those pension gain and losses, which is where the actuaries change their estimates. And we've got a lot of different information for 2020 as well. So let's put this together. Okay. Pension expense. We've got service cost of $12,000. That was given to us on the previous page. I'm just pulling mine up online. So that was given to us. Interest costs. Well, they told us that the PBO at the beginning of the year was $95,000, and they told us that our discount rate was 9%. So we can calculate $85.50. The $100,000 comes from the plan assets on the previous page times the expected rate. The expected rate's given to us. Now notice I have a discount rate of 9%, but I only think that I'm going to have return on assets of 7%. So right away we know net we're going to have a little bit of expense, right? Because we have $85.50 increasing pension expense and $7,000 decreasing it. I'm going to take that $12,500 that I was given in prior service costs, and I'm going to amortize that over 10 years because they told us 10 years is their service period. That's going to become part of expense. And then I'm going to do my corridor method. Okay, so I compared my plan assets that were $100,000 to, it's right here, the PBO, which was $95,000. I said, okay, yep, this one's bigger. So I take that larger one, multiply it times the 10%, which is what we'll always use. And now my corridor is 10,000. So what do I do with that 10,000? I take the total that was given to me on the previous page, that accumulated OCI, gains and losses from all of the changes our actuaries have made. I subtract the corridor, and I come up with 15,000, and I can amortize that over the remaining service period, which is given to us as well. So that means I've got to go ahead and pull 1,500 out of OCI and put it into pension expense. So putting the recap together, I've got the service cost, the interest costs, the reduction for the money I'm earning on the plan assets. I'm amortizing those changes I've made to my plan because FASB says, hey, you don't have to do it all at once. And then as that OCI balance of those actuarial changes got too big, I did my corridor calculation and I increased it by 1,500 to get that total. All right, so I'm going to again pause there. And this is a great chance for you guys to go and work on your homework a little bit.